We will now have a session, AI Biometrics and the new cyber threat surface in digital identity systems. Can I invite the moderator, Professor Carsten Maple, to please come up and introduce himself and the panelists?
Thank you very much. So, great to be here with you today. Let me see. There we go. So my name's Carsten Maple. I'm a professor at the Alan Turing Institute, which is the National Institute for Data Science and AI in the UK. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I've got Dr. Mirko Bottarelli with me. Please come up. Who's also from the Alan Turing Institute. If you sit in the middle. And I've got Chinthaka Ekanayake from Sri Lanka. Please come up. Thank you, Chinthaka. We're going to talk about quite a few subjects, so AI, biometrics, and the evolving cyber threat surface in digital identity systems. A lot of this work has been conducted at the Alan Turing Institute, thanks to a generous grant by the Gates Foundation that's been running for 6 years now. I'm going to skip over what the Alan Turing Institute is, so you can have a look at that in your own time if you wish, but I will tell you a little bit about the program, as I said, funded by the Gates Foundation. One thing that's important in what we do, funded by the Gates Foundation, is to make sure that we create impact. So we're really keen to make sure that we use data science and AI to create a better world, and partnering with the Gates Foundation has allowed us to do that. But our key partners in ensuring that impact are organizations such as MOSIP, so it's great to be here today with all of you that are involved in the ecosystem, the World Bank and their ID4D, their ID for Development program, Carnegie Mellon University, Africa, so there's colleagues from CMU Africa here, and as I said, the Gates Foundation. So what we're really interested in, so back in 2019, I attended at the invitation of the Gates Foundation, ID for Africa in Johannesburg. And it was really interesting to see how this digital public infrastructure journey was starting. Actually, the term DPI was not used at all really there, but it was about digital infrastructure. And a whole host of nations were starting to develop, and it's around the time that MOSIP itself started, so just earlier than that, because I think Prof this morning said 8 years they'd been going. But there was a great deal of work in digital identity systems, and we started a program called Trustworthy Digital Infrastructure, so we recognized where the nomenclature was going. But the important thing was, while lots of people were making advances and putting major investment into DPI, they couldn't really work out how secure or private or trustworthy in general the systems were. So that's why that program was developed, and we were really charged with developing research to be an independent organization that created the research and the resources and the toolkits to really deliver on that trustworthiness promise. We also created a global space for dialogue, and that's why those partners that I've just mentioned were so important to us, to give us that community to build around. So, as I mentioned, and it's great to see someone from the Gates Foundation just come in, the early part of that visit in 2019 at ID for Africa really highlighted the importance to help communities understand the trustworthiness. I'm afraid, I work in cybersecurity and privacy, and I'm afraid that I am a very, very busy person at the moment. And that's because just generally infrastructure, whoever's systems it is, whether it's private, government or personal, are being subject to attacks at the moment. That's an increasing number of attacks. And that's because it's much easier. And we've seen some recent attacks on a number of systems, including just a few days ago, there were calls, I should just say it, these are articles from that have been reported. They are reports. Please take that sometimes with a pinch of salt. The number of times I have read a headline saying Aadhaar has been compromised, and actually it's not Aadhaar at all that's been compromised. Yeah, so please, you know, I've put these titles, you can find these yourself. So please do not just take them at face value. There are nuances below. But the fact that I'm trying to show is that systems are being targeted. So cyber criminals have targeted. Only last year, it was, I think, it was just last year, where Morocco National Social Security Fund was targeted. Senegal, as I said, this week, the date here is February the 9th, this was reported. And just in September, Uganda. So these things are happening all the time. What that means may be limited, because actually any website you have, any system you have, any organization, it will undergo many attacks every single day. Some of them quite benign, some of them more sophisticated, some of them leading to huge impact. So the big thing at the moment, AI. So I will be going to India, as many people at this conference will be as well. But AI is just huge. We've seen a massive change in the democratization of AI. It's available to many people. I'll just ask a quick show of hands. Has anybody heard of OpenClaw? Yeah, okay. So you look at your news channels, you're not so much in the mainstream media, actually, but OpenClaw, really interesting. ClaudeBot, then Maltbook, and now OpenClaw. An AI agent system where you can have your own AI agent systems is a bit worrying. But that's an example of democratization of AI, putting it into the hands of everybody. Okay? So AI is finding its way into DPI in a number of ways. Not so much deeply into the stack, but what we are seeing is AI being used by attackers. So the first thing is, we've got to think about AI, how's it used in DPI compromise? Okay, so we've seen some changes, and these, again, recent stories, less than a year ago, where Mexico was trying to enhance its digital ID program because of AI attacks that they'd experienced escalating. And this report from SC Magazine is very recent, so this is in the last few months, but this was about the AI may force the reboot of America's identity system. So we've got some real kind of considerations. So what is it that AI is doing in terms of compromising DPI? Well, the first thing is, AI lets us just do things a lot faster. The scale is unprecedented, right? So we've got much more compute available. So it allows attacks across the whole DPI stack, right? So some of you may have seen, Dial have got a nice diagram of a DPI cake, yeah? And identity is an important layer within that. So MOSIP provides a really important element of that. But what we can see is scale across the whole stack. We get high fidelity fraud and impersonation. I'll talk about that in a moment. Those of you that were in the pad attack session earlier will have heard about that a little, and some of the ways that we can actually overcome those. But what we're seeing is increasing use of deepfakes, yeah? And I don't just mean the deep fake of some president in some country that's making some comments, but rather the deep fake that's much more targeted at people, including people that work in governmental offices, people who work as technical people in the private sector who've got some authorization to do some work. We're also seeing that it can undermine biometric and verification controls. So can we spoof, can we replay? For those of you that are a little bit technical, there is something called universal adversarial perturbations. So where we have, it could be an intrusion detection system that's there to spot people who are in a system. It could be anything at all. But what we can do is make little adjustments. Using AI helps us to see where are the most important areas to make adjustments and to sneak under the radar. of systems that are designed to protect. So these kind of techniques can undermine our verification, and they can bypass traditional detection and governance mechanisms. And finally, I mentioned about the different rails, the different layers in the DPI. What AI is giving us a risk of is amplifying systemic risk. So that's all pretty scary stuff, but actually what we have to do, we've been in this situation for a long, long time. AI has been around for a long time, and what's important is we need to use AI in defending DPI. So that's not about embedding necessarily AI for better service, for example, within the DPI stack. That's important. But actually, we need to think how we can use AI to defend DPI. So can we get better early detection and response? Can we strengthen fraud and impersonation prevention? We can, as we heard a little bit before, enhance biometric resilience through continuous model evaluation and improved pad detection. So I'm going to show up a couple of things that we've done, but one of the things that an earlier panelist, Roberto, led work on is to get much better detection of synthetic identities. And we've got some work at the moment looking at where somebody takes a selfie or a photograph of a physical ID. We are currently beating the state of the art in detecting whether that has been manipulated. And of course, AI can help humans in their human decision making. So human machine teaming is something I think is increasingly important. We have to think as we embed AI within the DPI, and this is not about detection, this is about improving DPI. We have to think about the challenges that we must address. All of these are addressable. We are looking at them within our program at the Turing Institute, and many others are as well. But we have to think, how can we manage the risk of improving the service? So I'm going to talk briefly about biometrics. And I'm going to talk about something specific, which is identifying who you are, right? So the thing is, oh, sorry, there's some text there I should have moved. The thing is that one person can have many different digital identities. We need to ensure that people can be held accountable. So when I talk about, people may have heard of the term responsible AI, right? Heard of that? For me, AI cannot currently be held responsible. It's about the humans who deploy AI that's responsible. What are we going to do if somebody, how can you make AI accountable? Yeah? If somebody is accountable, you can take them through some legal process, but that cannot be the case for AI. So we need to ensure that people can be accountable, and by having that accountability, we can disincentivize bad behavior. And finally, we need to have a way to ensure ownership of digital identities, especially when spoofing and account takeover can happen. So there are many ways we can do this, and we've done it for many years, and you'll all know from the systems you use how we're evolving, how you tie yourself to a digital system. And most of it is that, right? That's what you do most of the time. We have passwordless authentication. So you might have an authenticator and it says put a number in. Yeah. So we're moving from some of the traditional things to a combination. So you'll have heard of multi-factor authentication perhaps, but it's going to be some of this. Something you have, a password, a phone. Yeah. Something you know. So again, something you know is a password. Something you have is a phone, or years ago, RSID, if you remember that. It could be something you do, the way that you interact, how you're acting, or it could be, increasingly as well, someone you know, so some trusted third-party verification. And there are peer-to-peer protocols being developed. But if we look at the most common way, it is a biometric. So within a biometric, Yeah, there are many different ways to attack. So those in biometrics will know of this standard, 30107-1. And this just points about all the way through the system that these biometrics that we're hearing about. So PAD was one, presentation attack detection. So the presentation attack is one way that it can be attacked, but it's all the way through the ecosystem. And there are many different techniques available to attackers. So we've been working on some of these, looking at identifying attack vectors, looking at how we can protect the templates that you used, and looking at technologies, applicability, and challenges of biometric recognition systems in developing countries. We've written a whole host of other research papers, which if you reach out to me, I'll be happy to share with you. But what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about emerging challenges. How do we keep up with this huge landscape? Well, one way is to, if anyone's from a country, and I see people here in the audience, so Yadahi, I know you're going to be speaking for us soon, and others have, through our Cyber Threat Observatory. So this is to offer timely insight to across all nations to give a global context of threats to digital identity systems. And we have already released 5 reports that highlight some of the trends that we're seeing. So I encourage you to have a look at the Cyber Threat Observatory. Within that Cyber Threat Observatory, one of the most important developments we've made is something called DISTAF. And I'm going to invite Dr. Mirko Bottarelli up to tell you a little bit about DISTAF. Mirko.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So yes, I'm Mirko Bottarelli, and I'm part of Carsten team and Turing team for many years now. So DISTAF is a project that we started a few years ago now, 2 years I think, but is continuously evolving because it's evolving the core target of this framework and tool. So before speaking about the tool, let's try to understand a bit the rationale. So you are here because you agree with me with the starting point. Digital identity is fundamental. It's very important because it enables several other services provided by the government, like banking or online shopping and so on. Now, when you are the main actor in an environment, you have also responsibilities. Specifically, if there are some issues, if there are some gaps in your system, it's highly probable that those issues will somewhat be inherited by those other services. This is why it's paramount to spend a bit of effort to analyze, to assess the trustworthiness of the identity system. Now, I'm speaking about trustworthiness and not trust, because this is a bit more a discussion for philosophers, I suppose, but the idea is that trust is something that is subjective and you can measure at the end when you deploy the system. But we want something stronger. We want to measure the trustworthiness because it's objective, because it can be measured via a number of metrics. And in this regard, we want to try to make a shift between the typical historical way of assessing system using privacy and security, which are still good, but we know in that picture that there is something else that we need to cover, and we also know that we cannot do it at the end, but we need to bake this principle of trustworthiness throughout the entire project, which means from the design to the deployment, to the maintenance phase. Okay, so the first question is, why we need something new? Can't we just start with standards, that there are plenty out there? We have standards for security, we have standards for privacy, but that's the point. All the standards are silos. Okay, you can evaluate the security. It's difficult to evaluate the privacy together, even if we know, for example, that with the AI, privacy is not so disjointed to security anymore, okay? And again, we are still missing other dimensions like ethical consideration, robustness, reliability, and so on. And the other point is when we assess a system, we are not really interested in what the system can provide. And this is what the standards do. Okay, you got a checklist. Okay, this is compliant, this is not. You want to understand what you are not covering. And because the risk is an emerging property, it means you cannot evaluate it from the single components. You need to do it systemically. Which means that also the assessment of the trustworthiness must be done at the same, across all the layers. So for example, you can deploy the best technology available, but if the governance part is not to the same piece, the overall result will be less than optimal. And in this picture, you can also see what I just said before. We are also trying to capture the full phases from the design and operational parts in this stuff. This stuff is not a standard, it's a framework and a tool. The tool is not just the closure of the project, but it was part of the project since the beginning, because we really believe that someone must continuously assess the digital identity system in order to have the information required to improve the decision-making process. Okay, so this stuff is composed by 6 pillars. Leave aside security and privacy, which are quite trivial, and you know pretty much all of them. The important part are the ethics pillars that you can see below, above, and it covers concepts like transparency, explainability, fairness, that are more important considering the subject of this system. And then we have reliability on the bottom that is needed to understand how the system behaves in the normal circumstances, in normal condition. And then we have robustness and resilience that are needed to understand how the system behaves, in this case, under adversary conditions. Robustness if the input is, for example, perturbed. Resilience is if the system is under attack. Okay, in this big picture, you can see the 6 pillars, and then there is the middle circle is composed by what we call the features and or mechanisms. They are level 1 grouping of all metrics available. Now, just to give you an idea, there are 65 features covering all the pillars for a total of a bit above 400 metrics, divided evenly in 200 for the design and 200 for the operational part. Now, the features are not just there, to bridge the gap between something very abstract to something measurable. They are also useful because sometimes we don't need to make the assessment at the metric level. It will be very, very cumbersome. Sometimes, for example, at the beginning of the project, it is sufficient to do the same assessment using the features. It will be slightly less accurate, but still relevant. So on the left, you can see the scoring system. So you have the metrics. Each metric can be a Boolean metric. The majority of them are. You have also a percentage. You have a range when you need to measure, for example, the coverage of a system under a specific property. We average those scores, and we get the corresponding score of the mechanism. The same thing at the mechanism level to get the final pillar score. Now, because we are averaging, there is the opportunity, to game the system in the sense that you can avoid a very important metric because the overall result is still high if the other metrics of the same feature will be satisfied. So for this reason, we introduced this idea of mandatory metrics that you cannot avoid to be compliant. And if not satisfied, they impose a cap to both the mechanism and the pillar. I know I'm running, but the tool, this is just the first screen of the tool is available. It's completely open source. You can use as a Docker container, so the deployment is also very, very quick. So here is what I was saying before. you can, for example, for the collection and data minimization feature, you can either decide to go to the matrix, and there are 7 metrics for this specific feature, or you can just select from the preset configuration above the one that is closest to your system. And maybe you can stop there, or you can start by difference from there, just changing what you need to change. Another way to improve the life for the assessor is that you can start from the standards. If you already spend time, effort, and energy to be compliant to a standard, you can just click the specific entry, and automatically all the relevant metrics will be satisfied. Okay, so as a result, this stuff gives you a huge report with all the scores, the rationale behind the metric, the justification that maybe you wrote during the assessment, and so on. But I think what I like most is this polar chart that you can see here. This gives you a quickly or an immediate idea of the position of your system in the trustworthiness space. So especially if you are able to do both the design and operational assessment, you can see from the differences of these two areas where you should improve or not. I need to speak. Okay, that's just the final key takeaways from myself. So what I'm trying to say in this session is that trustworthiness cannot be assumed, it must be measured continuously for every specific phase of the project, must be done in a systematic way, and this stuff it's not a tool to judge the system, it's not a tool to decide which system is better than the other one, it's a companion tool that will help you throughout this journey in order to have a credible and evidence-based trust. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry for running.
Thank you, Mirko.
Welcome.
Okay, so we're into the final part now. So I'm just going to tell you the one thing that's important is collaboration. That's what MOSIP Connect is about. That's what the term is. And it's important that academia can offer this independent voice and undertake independent research. So with that in mind, we've had the pleasure of working with Chinthaka, who I'm going to give the last words to before we open for questions. So Chinthaka, would you like to come over and talk about how we collaborate?
Thank you, Professor Carsten. So when we talk about the digital public infrastructure, especially it's a national digital identity. So where we no longer talk about the just as another IT system, so IT infrastructure, we are talking about the national critical infrastructure. So if a DPI platform fails, the impact is not limited to the technology. It affects citizens' ability to access the services and the continue of the government operations and economic transaction, and most importantly, lose the public trust. So this is why experience across the multiple countries shows the technology alone is never enough. The successful DPI depends on trust, governance, resilience, and assurance. And trust cannot be built only the implementer or vendor or even the program team itself. So it's required independent and credible validation. So this is where the collaboration, globally respected institutes like Alan Turing Institute become important. So it bring values such as evidence-based assurance framework, international benchmark, and the external perspective on risk that external teams may not, the internal teams may not be always see. So however, it is important to clarify one principle. The collaboration does not mean is outsourcing the responsibility. The national DPI must always under full government and ownership as well as the sovereign control. So this is the role of the Global Institute is not run the system. The role is to challenge the assumptions, provide independent assessment, and strengthening confidence among the stakeholders. So countries implementing MOSIP-based ID system, this kind of collaboration has very practical benefit. It reassures the regulators, development partners, funding agencies, and most importantly, citizens and also accelerate adoption, interoperability, and long-term sustainability. So moving on, once the system goes live at the national scale, the risk profile changes completely. Before we go live, we test functionality, but after we go live, we must protect citizens' data, high transaction volumes, and complex integration across the entire government ecosystems. So this is exactly where the independent assurance framework becomes most critical, because many of the biggest risks are no longer purely technical. So there are governance risks, dependency risks, operational resilience gaps, and even social and trust-related risks also. So one practical example of such approach on this stuff is look beyond the traditional compliance checklist. It evaluates cybersecurity resilience, privacy, data protection, business continuity and disaster recovery, governance and accountability, and even ethical and social impacts. This stuff also complements existing controls like ISO standard, NIST, and ITIL. In many cases, traditional audits confirm where the control exists. Frameworks like this stuff help answer the deeper question: can citizens trust this system at national scale? So it is also important to emphasize this stuff not just only the framework, rather it is a strong example of multidisciplinary independent assurance that can be strengthened in DPI programs. So this is ensuring trust, resilience, and future-proof. So I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chinthaka. So I think that's a good way to end, to talk about how the work we're doing at an independent organisation really leads to someone being able to utilise that framework and those outcomes. I think we've got time for one question. I'm afraid that's all we have at this moment, so that we can move on for time. So if there is any question, I'm happy to take a question Saul now for myself or any of the panelists. If not, we'll be happy to see you over the networking later. Any questions?
And government being very doubtful about academics. So can you elaborate on the
I think
model?
that's a really important point. What's really important is working with the right partners. So the Gates Foundation have actually been really instrumental in getting the Turing to be able to meet a wide community. Beyond that, MOSIP itself and events like this has brought together academics, so we'll be on a panel talking about this very point later, Hassan, so I'd invite you to come here in half an hour where we'll be talking about this very issue. But what it really needs, it needs a certain type of academic as well, to be truthful, because we have to be driven to make that change. So if you get enough champions, that's what's going to make the big change. Thank you.